Hey folks, Jason Dukes here with Dirt Race Life. So y'all check it out. The metric street stock build is finally complete. I got it out here in the sun, letting this vinyl dry out and get good and tight on this car, getting ready to go race. And we need to put a setup on this car for it to be ready. So let's do a quick walk around the car, and then we'll put it in the shop, put it on the scales, go through the springs, the shocks, the setup, the ride height, and everything. Get this thing as good as we can get it to go out right off the bat and start winning races. Y'all stick around. I made a compromise on the slope in this hood. A lot of these cars, you see them come down fairly low of the deck, and then they'll have like this bubble over the engine, and I just don't like that because it doesn't look like a car on the street. I want the car to look like a race car, you know? And so I did slope this overall. I've got like a consistent angle coming down through here without that bubble lift. But the compromise is that it really puts like a flat breather like this way above the hood line. I ended up going with the Dominator hood cowl here. This is the tallest one. I think this is like a 5.5 inch, and I'm still peeking out just a little bit. This was the compromise that I did. I think it worked out pretty good. Of course, you see the top wrap here that Extreme Concepts did. Extreme Concepts, Kevin Tripp, I gave him some ideas in my old logo, and then he just took it and went with it, and I am just tickled to death with it. One of our build sponsors, Brian Swagger, he's also building a car as well, but he showed me something he was doing on his car, and I just loved it, and I did the same thing. Y'all check this out. So what you're looking at here, that is my aluminum floor pan that bolts in from underneath, where I can take it off and I can access up underneath the dash or whatever I need to do. Well, Brian showed me using skateboard grip tape, and that's what that is. That's orange and black checkerboard skateboard grip tape. Yeah, that stuff is amazing. It is like super thick. I bought one roll that would be like to do one skateboard, and it is like this, got this real heavy adhesive. It is much thicker than like sandpaper, guys. It is like some thick, gritty stuff. So put it on, no doubt it is never coming off. I think that roll was maybe $15, $18 or something, shipping and all. Got it off Amazon, of course. I will put the link on my website, dirtracelife.com. On our rear pillars right here, we just used the regular race car body sheeting. I just kind of drew that on cardboard until it looked right, and then used that as a pattern to make them, is basically how I did it. Cut it back right here to match the spoiler. This is the 4-inch spoiler kit. I got this from Statement Race Cars. Ben and John Keith, they make these in both a 4-inch and in an 8-inch version, and they sell these. Now, they make race cars, Statement Race Cars. It's amazing, beautiful cars that they build, but you can buy some of these parts from them. They have like plasma CNC tables and stuff. They produce parts that they'll sell. So I will put a link to like their contact information in the description, because you can get these and they'll just ship them right to you. Not very expensive, really nice stuff right here. So, and of course, I painted it satin black, and I think I set this at about 75 degrees, and you'll see I don't even have a hinge here on the large part. I do have a hinge on the small where I can dump that out if I wanted to. I won't. I always just leave these fixed, y'all. I lock them in around 75 degrees and never touch them. This is the Dominator recessed door kit right here, and I think this is the 8x8 one. We did it for fuel cell access. They also have like a real wide one as well if you need it, but this was the perfect size for this. Threw that in right there. We ended up going with a trick helmet blower that's above the deck of the car. I was running into problems with water wicking its way in to all of the blowers that flush mount to the deck with the motor sitting up underneath it. I had 2 of them in the last 2 years that water would get down into the bottom of the electric motor and would freeze the bearings up, and they would quit working. And that's all it was. I would tear them down, and it's just rust that had gotten in there. And, you know, that was with me trying, like, not letting the car get rained on out and that be exposed, not getting water in it when I washed it, but I was still getting water in it. So just changed the whole game plan, went with that trick unit like that. There's a couple of different ones now that'll mount to a roll bar like that, but yeah, it works. Had a set of charging poles for the battery. Of course, I threw them in right there. as well. I just built a simple back bumper here that's 2 pieces of 1.5" tubing here. This one here is just mounted flat, and I turned those ends in to like 110 degrees. That way they actually turn back and are less likely to hook something by doing that. So I turned those back a little, about 20 extra degrees, and then the top one I just did a 90-degree bend, belted it in. It's not straight up and down. I tilted it back 15 degrees as well. I went with the Dominator black wheel covers here, and of course we've got the Dominator orange skirting all around the car. I also have the skirting to go on the front of the nose, but I need to get the final scale numbers and make sure the car is exactly how it's going to be and like what it's going to pull down to before I set that, where they don't get it too high or too low. So I'll do it after I get the car in the shop. So let's get the car in the shop. So what I did was I set the ride heights on the car, you know, without the scales, just, you know, after I got it built and before I started putting the body on, I set the frame to what I felt like it should be. And I just did it like that. And of course, you know, when we did the episode where that we put the big plate that we can bolt all the lead on, we put a 50-pound plate on the back of the car, and we put like 4 40-pound blocks across. We've got really good numbers here. Our left side percentage came in at 53.9. Our rear percentage on the car is 54.4% rear. Our bite in the car right now, just with us guessing, we ended up with 83 pounds of bite in the car. Now that we know is going to change because we're going to make adjustments on this car in its cross weight. Total weight on the car is 3,035 pounds. So my targets on this build were 54% left and 54% rear on actual weight placement in the car. And we are, you know, 53.9, 54.4. I am tickled to death with that. So we're going to leave that alone, and now all we're going to focus on is getting this angle on the car, that final ride height, and the wedge and stuff in the car right, and then setting the chains on the car to go along with that. So let's work on that right front. We want to get that down number figured out on that right front. So you can see how I did this Dominator fender right here, attached across, piece of aluminum. Bent that inside lip so they give it some strength there. Of course, I've got a hole here with a tab and a hole here with a tab where it goes over my hood pins. That was actually really simple to make, y'all. And like I said, the only modification that I did to the fender is that this rear half right here, I trimmed that off. And then just kind of all fell in place. I think this is going to work really good. And when I redo the Camaro next time, I'll probably do it like this. So since we've got our ride heights fairly close and our scale numbers close to what they need to be, first thing we want to do here is I want to get this down number on this right front and like figure out, is this right front where it needs to be? And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to pull the shock out, I'm going to put the load stick on. I've got the load stick in the car. I've got it just pulled up until the slacks took out of it. The car's sitting on its own weight. I've got it sitting on 0 right now. I'm going to jack the frame up where it's all on the load stick then, and I'm going to pull on that load stick. I'm going to turn that load stick down until I compress this right front up and hit 1,800 pounds. All right. The reason I'm doing that is because I suspect that this car on a slick track, typically in a feature, is going to go to around 1,800 to 2,000 pounds. We just have to make a guess. Wherever the shock is mounted, how all of your suspension works, it changes what that number is. But I've got to go with something to get an initial recording, you know, like, okay, this is what it measured at this height. And then we can turn around and start taking like a Sharpie marker and marking the shock, seeing what it actually does. And we've got that baseline that's established so we can start gathering data to adjust. So I'm not saying this is the number it should be. It's just an estimated guess on where to start. That's what we're doing here. So, and like I talked to Mr. J. Neal at BSB, you know, and he's like, you know, well, maybe as much as 2,000. I thought 1,800. He said, don't be afraid to go to 2,000. So we're going to put it somewhere in there. So like, okay, so I've got it up off of the scale, and you see I have 847 pounds. So that's what, at the shock location, it read as the amount that it was having to hold up right there for the car. All right, so now I'm going to take, and I'm going to turn that down until I hit 1,800 and see how much that, as a matter of fact, I'm going to take a reading right now first. I was at 18.5 inches center to center is where I was. So now I'm going to turn around and I'm going to pull this thing down until I hit 1,800 and see how much compression that was. All right, so there's 1,800 right there. Let's see how much actual compression at the shock that was. All right, so now I'm reading 15.5 inches. So that's nice. That's 3 inches of compression at 1,800 pounds. So I can take this information, and then from that we can learn. So we're going to take a black Sharpie marker with us. We're going to mark the shock when we're at the track running. We're going to see like where the shock actually rubs off the marker, and then that's going to tell us what it's actually getting down to. If it's not getting down to 15.5 inches, then we can take and figure out what that load that it's really able to hold on that particular track and conditions is. If it's going past that, we know that it's holding more load in the car and going down further. And so we can look and see what the measurement is and figure out, okay, it's not 1,800 on this track. It was only holding this much, or it was holding more than that. And then hopefully, as this season goes through on this new car, that's going to help teach us when and where to like say, okay, we need to run 50 pounds more spring on the right front, or 50 pounds less, or 100 pounds more, or hey, this ride height needs to be altered a little bit so that the car will get where we want it to be. So like right now we're just gathering information, but for a starting setup, that's nice. 3 inches of compression. Not gonna lie to y'all, this is exactly what me and Mr. J, I think, expected this to do. He suggested putting a 950-pound spring on this right front, and he was like, and you should get around 3 inches of compression, and that's exactly what it's doing. So, thank you, Mr. J. All right, so I'm going to leave this load stick on this right front now, and I'm going to sit this car back down, pulled down in its attitude that it should be in full compression for the next thing. So you can see the car's in its fully compressed stance right now. It's all the way down on the right front. I'm down 3 inches here. I'm up 3 inches here. I'm going to pick the back of the car up until I get 1 inch more of extension on that right rear. And then that is going to be my left rear position for the chain to be engaged. It is just a guess. We have to start somewhere, and what I suspect is like, okay, where the car gets into its full compression as I'm going through the middle of corner entry, I want it to be on the chain where that I level my weight out across the back of the car, and the car is going to be up just a little bit from static ride height, like on that right rear, and that left rear, of course, is going to be up the amount that it's down on the right front already. So we have to start somewhere, and this is our estimated way of being able to get close. So I'm going to jack that up just a little bit, measuring that shock to do it, and then we're going to set that chain. I'm going to raise the whole back of this car up until that right rear is up 1 inch. And I guessed on that left rear chain, and I think I'm going to be pretty close. It ain't tight yet. Alright, down just a little bit. Okay. So now, I just raised that up 1 inch. And so, it'll be a little more than an inch out here on the corner. Alright, so now that I've done that, I want to make sure I have not topped out my shock here. Make sure I'm not topping my shock out, and I'm not. I got another 1.5 inches on that shock, so I'm good there. My chain is not quite tight, so I'm going to adjust this chain until it's in tension with this ride height where it's at right now. All right, we got our chain set right there, and I think that's all I'm going to do with the car pulled down. I'm not going to set the spring. Like right now, I don't know that I got my load quite right. With that chain taut, I got 3 inches of load in this left rear, and I've got, right now, you know, I've only got, you know, 1 inch of load in that right rear. And of course, I know that right rear is up just a little bit as well. But I don't know how to set my load and my springs with it like in dynamic like this. So I'm going to take that load stick off that right front. I'm going to set the car back down normal, and then we'll turn around and we'll set our load in our rear springs. Okay, I got the car at normal ride height now, and 2 things I wanted to check right here first. I'll make sure I got that slack in that right rear chain. There's about 1.5 inches of slack right here. I don't want this chain to get tight until right before that spring would have like got loose in the mount. All that chain does is just make sure that that spring is staying in tension. We don't want to hit this as a normal part of going around the track. We don't want this chain to get tight. If this chain gets tight, it can make the car want to turn hard to the right all at once. So really, it's just to keep this chain, to keep this spring in tension in case we hit a rut or something. It doesn't let the spring jump loose. But I'm looking for about 1.75 inches to 2 inches of load sitting at static ride height. And so like on this side, I am at 1.5 inches of load. And on this side, I am at, let me get over here. Yeah, I am at right at 2 inches of load. So 1.5 inches on one side, 2 inches on the other. So that's 1.75 inches average of load in this spring right here. So I'm going to call that right as a starting point. All right, so I'm putting this jack right up in here on the corner of this left rear frame rail. And I am going to pick this car up until that chain gets tight. Right in here, right there. So I got right on this left rear corner. I jacked the frame up till my chain got tight right here. We'll check this spring and see how much load we got in it. We want preload on this spring. And we're sitting on almost 13.25 there. It's a 16-inch spring, y'all. And a little over a 13.25 there. So around 2 3/4 inch of load on this 125 spring. That's a little more than what I want. I want maybe at most 300 pounds of preload, no more, 250 to 300 pounds of preload. So I really need to get this down more like 2.5 inches. So I'm going to back this jack bolt off just a little bit. All right, so that's got us down there at 2.5 inches of preload with the chain tight. So that's somewhere a little over 300 pounds, 315 pounds, something like that is what this preload is at. Okay, y'all, on the driver's side, through the center of the bolt, it is 8 inches from the ground to the center of the bolt. I'm doing the math for that 2-inch scale pad that I've got here. So real distance, 8 inches right there. All right, on the passenger side here, we are, let's see, it's 9 3/4, so that's 7 3/4 inches from the center of the bolt to the ground, total distance, 7 3/4 of an inch. So 8 inches on the driver's side, 7 3/4 inches on the passenger side. All right, ride heights on the rear. I got a 1/2 inch plate right there. So that is actually 12 1/4 minus my 2-inch scale pad, 10 1/4 inches on my passenger side, 10 1/4 inches to the bolt. What is the angle of my... All right, so my right rear trailing arm is sitting at 3 degrees, and I may go back. I may drill a hole to get that up to 0. I'm not going to worry about it initially. We're going to run it, but it might be even better if I was to drill another hole and make it 0. But it's 3 degrees right now on my right rear lower trailing arm. Then the driver's side over here is, all right, the left rear trailing lower is 11 inches to the center of the bolt. And the angle of the lower arm is 10 degrees. I got 10 degrees. So I got 3 degrees on the right rear and I got 10 degrees on the left rear. As far as the trailing arms drop, I'm sitting at about 2.5 inches on that one, and about 2 3/4 of an inch on this one. And like I said, I might move that one up on the right side. All right, we're gonna put a stop on this left front. I'm not gonna call it a chain, but anyway, you see 2 links and you see that 3/8 bolt right there, and I threaded up like a full 2 inches of threads right here. And before I put the lower control arm on, I welded me on a 3/4 inch sleeve right there, right above the frame, because I knew like we were heading towards this when we got to the end of the build. But what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put this on. I want something that's really easy for me to adjust, and I just want to be able to reach up under the car and just have a nylon stop nut that I can just, you know, wrench on and tighten this down. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop this in that hole, and I'm gonna run the nut all the way up. So I'm gonna set it at ride height at 0, and then I can back it off to put 1.5 inches of travel into that left front, which is what I'm normally gonna run, but I'll have that adjustment to go all the way to 0 at ride height if I want to. So let me get up underneath here and put this in. Okay, so that would be adjusted all the way up. Now I'm gonna turn around and take that chain, and I'm going to, yep, I figured it right. Figured it would be just about right there. So I'm gonna take it. All right, so we got our hole. Just simple, simple, simple. Like that. I may have to back it off just a little bit to get that to go through there. Then take our bolt nut here. And put that right through there like that. Yep. All right, so right there I've got it at 0 ride height. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna back this off a lot. And then I'm gonna take a tape measure. I'm gonna get my measurement right here. All right, center to center. 16 1/4 inches center to center. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a jack and I'm gonna jack this up 1.5 inches on the shock. Not right here, because this is in from that, but actually on the shock. So it'd go from 16 1/4 to 17 3/4. So I'm just gonna sit here and jack it up until I get to 17 3/4. All right, so that's 1.5 inches on the shock. With 1.5 inches on the shock, I'll just take and tighten that nut up. I may put another nut on there and lock that, because it turns fairly easy, so I may put another nut on it, y'all, just so that it won't move. But yeah, okay, so now I have got that set for 1.5 inches, and then the shaft will just go back and forth in this. It's like plenty of room, so it's not going to bind. It's going to be fine, fine, fine. So now I can drop that out. and it'll just sit like that right there. And when I'm in compression, see, I've got plenty of room here for it to compress as well. Yeah. So, simple, quick, works. Final numbers here and see where we're at. All right, so let's look at those details. Here are the raw numbers from the scales, and this is what that turned out. 53.9 left, 54.4 on the rear. The cross now is at 48.1. My left rear bite is at 60 pounds. Don't read too much into that. I will talk about that more in a minute. But my total is 3,034 pounds. All right, so great numbers, great total weight with the lead right where we want it. Really, really happy with that. Ride heights. Now, as you know, this was the center of the bolt that goes through the frame and the lower control arm through the front. So 8 inches on the left front, 7 3/4 on the right front, and then the lower trailing arm on the back, the center of the bolt to the ground, 11 inches on the left rear, 10 1/4 inches on the right rear. All right, and then I also wrote down those angles. I'm at 10 degrees on my left rear lower control arm, or lower trailing arm, excuse me. And then on my right rear, I'm at 3 degrees, and I could go to 0 on this, and it would help the car. It would tighten the car some up, center off. If I went to 0 possibly, I'm going to reserve that. That's one of those possible things that, like, maybe we do drill another hole as we work with the car. All right, so on the spring rates down here, 1,000 pounds on the left front, 950 pounds on the right front, a 125 16-inch on the left rear, and a 230 250 13-inch spring. Now that's a special BSB spring right there. It's normal coils all the way through, but when it gets about 2 inches of load in it, it'll ramp up from 230-pound rate to a 250-pound rate. And if you buy one of those from BSB, he sends the sheet with it. He dynos all his springs and everything. It's really good stuff, y'all. On the shocks, I have a 300-pound rebound, 130-pound compression on the left front. I also have a 100-pound rebound, 130-pound compression for the left front as well. This shock right here will make the car tighter center off. And so we may switch depending on track conditions, but just be aware I have 2 different shocks here for the left front of the car. We'll just figure it out. On the right front, we're going to go with a 500-pound rebound, 130 pounds compression with a base valve. I also have an 800-pound rebound, 130-pound shock as well. The 800 pounds, the track would have to be very tacky, really hooked up off the corner for me to need to put the 800 on, because that's going to hold the car and not let it transfer weight into that left rear. So like it would have to be very heavy conditions, but we have it. And if we need to try that out or we have conditions for it, we could go to that. On the left rear, I've got a 75-pound rebound, 550 pounds of compression. On the left rear, this shock right here has an SRT valve and a base valve. The SRT valve is a valve that will let the car handle rough track conditions, going through a bump or a rut or something, and keep the tire connected to the track. The base valve is going to add a lot of feel to the shock itself. And then on the right rear, I have a 40-pound rebound, 110-pound compression. That one also has the SRT valve and the base valve in it. I have an alternate right rear that is 50 pounds of rebound. If the track goes slick as it dries out and the track slows down, it could be advantageous for me to go from a 40-pound rebound to a 50-pound rebound. So I have those 2 shocks to try out. We'll have to try them and just learn as we go through it. All right, so this setup over here, this is what I'm going to go to the track with next weekend and try out. On that 60 pounds of bite, you got to remember, I'm running a soft left rear spring. I'm setting the preload, and I've got quite a bit of preload in this car. I'm not going to read too much into this. When you're running a real soft left rear spring, You can't necessarily set up your car to go for bike. That's one of the reasons like Mr. J. Neal with BSB suggests to like just set the car up with like a 175-pound spring on the left rear. If you're wanting to see a particular bike number, you know, to set your ride heights and do everything, and then switching to it and ignoring your spring numbers. So that really doesn't concern me at all because the ride heights are where they need to be. I see the load in the springs themselves is where I want it. I'm seeing that right front is going to be where I want it to be when it's like all the way down in dynamic in load in that turn. And so because of that, we're going to go with this. And then based on how the car drives and what the car is telling us it wants, you know, we may start, you know, working with that and turning rounds on all four corners of the car to just bring the cross up or down overall. So just be aware, like, but this is where we're going to start, and like it only having 60 pounds of bike doesn't bother me a bit at all. Ride height wise, I'm about 1 inch below my max. So my max is like 40 and I'm sitting at about 39 when I get in the car. It's about 40 when I'm out of the car, and then it sits down to about 39. So if we go to any big shows, we're checking, you know, the deck heights and stuff. We know we're good on that. And we've got some room, you know, if we need to work on the car and put some bite into the car or something during the night, we know that we're not going to cause ourselves to get disqualified when we do that because we're staying well under what the maximum is on the ride height. And then the preload on these, again, we were at 2.5 inches on the spring preloaded when we were on the chain on the left rear, and then on the right rear with it sitting, you know, statically at ride height, we had 1.75 inches of load in this. So that would be, let's see, 1.75 inches, 400 pounds, somewhere in there of load. You can do the math on that, but yeah, about 1.75 inches of compression on that spring right there on the right rear. Really happy with this overall. It's what we're going to go with. I think this car is spot on. So you can see here, A to Z Mobile Services right here. That was Billy Sturgill, huge sponsor of our build right here, along with, you know, Keith Whitmire, Jared Flower, Alex Garza, Chuck Livengood, and Tanny Livengood. They have been huge sponsors and supporters of us on the channel. Chuck and Tony have for a very long time. Thank you guys. I could not have built this car without them. There's a few more, so like Brian Swagger as well. 100% the build sponsors and our YouTube channel members. That's how we're able to do this. That's how we're able to compete at this level. I think we finally built what we actually need to be able to show them you can build a car at home with minimum tools and compete at the top level. I'm super excited. Can you tell? Check out our description for a link to become a member of the channel. Also, you can go to dirtracelife.com because I've got all of this information. I'm going to put like all of these setup details on the website. I've got links to anything on Amazon. I do draw a commission off of that, so it's much appreciated. Any link you go through on my website, it does help us to be able to race, as well as the link is there to become a member of the channel at $5 or $10 a month. Thank y'all very much. Make sure you're subscribed because we are going to have this car on the track. See you next time.